Snow fell in heavy, languid flakes, draping the city in a pristine white shroud. The faint glow of street lamps cast long, wavering shadows across the deserted streets, their light swallowed by the relentless flurry. Michael gripped the steering wheel of his bus, navigating the night route with practiced ease. His hands, rough with calluses earned over 20 years of driving, held steady despite the slick road. The dashboard clock glowed 11:40 p.m., its green digits a quiet reminder that the shift was nearly done. Tonight's run had been unusually serene, hardly any passengers. A pair of students bundled in scarves and laughter had hopped off at the university dorms, and an elderly woman, her arms straining under the weight of grocery bags, had thanked him profusely when he helped her down at the market stop. Now just one more stop remained before the turnaround at the depot, and then he'd be home, where warmth and comfort waited. Michael's lips curved into a soft smile as he pictured Kyrie, his wife, setting out a plate for him. After all their years together, through late shifts, early mornings, and everything in between, she still stayed up for him, her presence a constant anchor. The bus rumbled along, its heater humming faintly, as he neared the final stop on the city's outskirts. The snow was thicker here, piling high on the sidewalks, untouched by footprints. He squinted through the windshield, ready to roll past the empty shelter. Who'd be out in this bitter cold at this hour? But then, a small shape caught his eye, huddled on the bench beneath the stop's flickering light. His chest tightened. He hit the brakes harder than he meant to, the bus lurching to a stop and flung the doors open with a hiss. "What in the world?" he muttered under his breath, leaning forward to peer through the frost-etched glass. There on the bench sat a child, a boy no older than 7 or 8, curled into himself. His oversized blue coat, frayed at the cuffs, swallowed his slight frame, and a knit hat had slipped low, nearly covering his eyes. His boots, scuffed and too big, swung above the snow-dusted pavement, too short to touch the ground. Michael's heart thudded as he leapt from the driver's seat, shrugging off the instinct to grab his own coat. The cold bit at his skin as he stepped into the storm. "Hey, kiddo," he called gently, trudging through the snow to crouch in front of the boy. "What are you doing out here all by yourself? It's freezing." The child lifted his head, revealing a face flushed red from the cold, his cheeks streaked with the faint tracks of tears. His wide, glassy eyes met Michael's, and his small hands clutched a tattered backpack adorned with a faded cartoon dinosaur. "I'm William," he whispered, his voice trembling as much from the chill as from fear. His lips quivered, and he sniffled, wiping his nose with a sleeve that hung past his fingertips. Michael's brow furrowed. "William, huh? That's a fine name. But where's your family? Your mom or dad?" He glanced up and down the street, half expecting to see someone hurrying toward them, apologetic and frantic. But the road stretched empty in both directions, the snow falling in silent curtains. "My mom," William said, his voice barely audible. "She told me to wait here." He hugged his backpack tighter, as if it could shield him from the cold or the weight of his words. Michael's stomach twisted. "Wait here? In this weather?" He kept his tone soft, not wanting to scare the boy, but urgency crept in. "How long you been sitting out here, William?" The boy shrugged, his shoulders barely moving under the bulky coat. "I don't know. A while, I guess." His gaze dropped to his boots, which swung faintly, kicking up tiny puffs of snow. Then, hesitantly, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, its edges worn and creased by small, careful fingers. "Mommy gave me this," he said, holding it out. Michael took the note, his fingers brushing William's icy ones. He unfolded it slowly, the paper crackling in the quiet. The handwriting was shaky, scrawled in uneven lines. "Take care of him. His name is William. I can't do it anymore." The words hit like a punch. Michael read them again, hoping he'd misread, but they stared back, stark and final. He looked at William, who was watching him with those wide, teary eyes, and felt a surge of protectiveness he couldn't explain. "All right, buddy," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "You're not staying out here in this cold. Come with me, okay? We'll figure this out together." William hesitated, clutching his backpack like a lifeline, then nodded faintly. Michael stood, offering his hand. "Let's get you warmed up on the bus. I bet I've got a blanket in there somewhere." As the boy's small, cold fingers curled into his, Michael glanced back at the empty street, the snow already filling in the traces of their steps. Who could leave a child alone in the dead of winter, abandoned at a desolate bus stop? What kind of heart could bear it? Michael scanned the shadows beyond the street lamp's glow, half hoping to catch a glimpse of someone. A prankster, a remorseful parent, anyone. But the world was still, cloaked in the relentless snow. Only the faint whisper of flakes brushing the ground broke the silence, each one piling onto the mystery of the boy left behind. Inside the bus, warmth spilled from the heaters, a stark contrast to the biting cold outside. Michael guided William to the front seat, just behind the driver's, where the heat would wrap around him like a blanket. The boy's small frame seemed even tinier against the worn upholstery, his oversized coat pooling around him. Michael cranked the heater to its highest setting, the vents humming to life. "There we go, buddy," he said, his voice steady despite the storm of questions in his mind. "You'll warm up in no time." He unwound his own scarf, a thick woolen thing Kyrie had knitted years ago, and draped it gently around William's neck, tucking it under his chin. "Gotta keep you cozy while I figure out what's next." William's eyes, wide and glassy in the bus's dim overhead light, followed Michael's every move. The boy sat still, clutching his dinosaur backpack, his silence heavy with unspoken fears. Michael's thoughts churned. Call the police, find a shelter, get answers. But first, he needed to keep the kid calm. He rummaged in his work bag, pulling out the lunch Kyrie had packed. 2 sandwiches neatly wrapped, the bread soft and fragrant with her homemade touch. "You hungry, William?" he asked, softening his tone. The boy nodded, hesitant, his gaze flickering to the food. Michael handed him a sandwich, unwrapping it partway to make it easier. "Here you go. Take small bites, all right? No need to rush." William took the sandwich in both hands, his fingers still chilled but steadier now. He nibbled cautiously, the simple act of eating seeming to ground him. Michael watched, leaning against the driver's seat trying to piece together the puzzle. "How old are you, kiddo?" he asked, hoping conversation might ease the tension. "I'll be 6 in the spring," William said after swallowing a bite, his voice small but clear. He paused, then added, "In March. Mommy says I'll have a big cake with dinosaurs on it." Michael smiled faintly, picturing the scene. "Dinosaurs, huh? That sounds like a party. You like school yet?" William shook his head, his hat slipping slightly. "Not yet. Mommy said I'd start in the fall. She was going to get me a new backpack, a bigger one." His voice trailed off and he stared at the half-eaten sandwich as if the memory had snagged on something sharp. Michael's chest tightened. "Your mum. Where is she now, William?" He kept his tone gentle, but the question carried weight, and he braced for the answer. The boy's face shifted, his expression suddenly too serious, too old for his years. He set the sandwich down in his lap, his hands fidgeting with the wrapper. "Mummy's real sick. Kevin said they took her to the hospital and she won't come back." His voice cracked on the last words, barely a whisper. "Then Kevin brought me here, told me to wait." Michael's jaw clenched, a slow burn of anger rising in his gut. "Kevin? Who's that?" he asked, keeping his voice even, though his hands twitched with the urge to do something, anything to make this right. William shrugged, his eyes dropping to his boots. "Kevin's my stepdad. He lives with us. He's not like Mommy." The words hung heavy, each one fueling Michael's growing fury. A stepfather. A man who'd left a child in the cold with nothing but a note and a backpack. What kind of coward could do that? He took a deep breath, forcing calm. "All right, William. Do you know where you live? Like, the street name or what your house looks like?" The boy shook his head, his shoulders slumping. We just moved. A new apartment. There's still boxes everywhere, and I don't know the street. Michael ran a hand through his hair, glancing out the windshield at the snow piling higher. Michael stared at the dashboard clock, its glowing digits ticking toward midnight. Time was slipping away, and with it, any chance of easy answers. What now? Take William to the police? The thought churned his stomach. The boy had been through enough. Flashing badges and sterile station rooms might terrify him. Worse, they'd likely shuffle him to a shelter, a cold, impersonal place filled with strangers. After being left in the snow with nothing but a note, William deserved better than that. Michael's mind raced, weighing options, until a decision settled over him like the snow outside, quiet, but certain. He pulled out his phone, the screen's light harsh in the dim bus, and dialed Kyrie. The line rang once, twice before her familiar voice answered, soft and warm like a hearth after a long day. Michael, you all right, love? I'm still up waiting for you as always. There was a smile in her tone, but a trace of worry too. Something happen? You running late? Michael exhaled, his breath fogging briefly in the cooling air of the bus. Kyrie, he faltered, the words tangling. How do you explain a child left in the cold? I'm not coming home alone tonight. A pause. What do you mean? Her voice tilted with curiosity laced with concern. He glanced at William, who sat quietly clutching his backpack, eyes fixed on the sandwich crumbs in his lap. I found a kid at the last stop, a little boy, sitting all alone in this snowstorm. There was a note with him. Says he's been abandoned. Can you believe that? His voice cracked, anger and disbelief seeping through. Silence stretched on the other end, heavy and thick. Kyrie, you still there? Yes, I'm here, she said, her voice softer now, trembling with emotion. Abandoned? In this weather? Oh, Michael. How old is he? Almost 6. His name's William. Michael's gaze flicked to the boy again, catching the way his small hands gripped the backpack, as if it were all he had left. Another pause, then Kyrie's voice came through, resolute. Bring him home, Michael. Right now. I'll make up the guest bed and heat up some soup. Poor thing must be starving and scared out of his mind. Relief flooded Michael, warm and grounding. His Kyrie, always the one to open her heart, no questions asked. They'd spent years dreaming of children, their hopes met with quiet disappointments, month after month. Now this boy, cast aside by those meant to protect him, had stumbled into their lives. Thank you, love, Michael said, his voice thick. We'll be there soon. He pocketed the phone and turned to William, who was watching him with those wide, wary eyes. Hey, buddy, Michael said, softening his tone. How'd you like to come home with me? My wife, Kyrie, she's already getting things ready. Dinner, a warm place to sleep. In the morning, we'll figure out what's next. Sound okay? William hesitated, his fingers tightening around the straps of his backpack. Then, slowly, he nodded. A flicker of something. Hope, maybe, sparking in his gaze. Do you have a TV? He asked, his voice small but curious, as if testing the waters. Michael chuckled, the sound easing the weight in his chest. You bet we do. Big one too. Plus a bathtub with plenty of hot water and a cozy bed just for you. What do you say? Ready to roll? He flashed a grin, hoping to coax a smile. William's lips twitched. Not quite there, but close. Okay, he said, settling back against the seat. Michael climbed into the driver's seat, flicking on the wipers to clear the snow piling on the windshield. The blades swept back and forth, revealing the road ahead in stuttering glimpses. As he eased the bus into gear, he stole a glance at William in the rearview mirror. The boy had turned to the window, his breath fogging the glass as he stared into the snowy night. The street lamp's glow caught his face, his small upturned nose, the gentle curve of his chin, and for a fleeting moment Michael froze. Something about that profile tugged at him, like a half-remembered dream. Familiar, yet impossible to place. He shook his head, chalking it up to exhaustion. Long shifts did that, played tricks on the mind. "All right, William," he said, more to himself than the boy. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The bus rumbled forward, carrying them through the storm toward warmth, toward answers, or at least the hope of them. Tomorrow he'd call the authorities, track down this Kevin, figure out what had happened to William's mother. But tonight, his job was simple. Get this kid home. The drive home was quiet, the bus's low hum filling the gaps where words might have been. William sat hunched in the front seat, his backpack cradled in his lap, answering Michael's gentle questions with murmurs and half-sentences. "You like dinosaurs, huh?" Michael tried, nodding at the faded T-Rex on the bag. "Yeah," William mumbled, his voice barely rising above the heater's drone. Exhaustion weighed on the boy's small frame, his eyelids drooping despite the warmth now curling around him. Michael kept stealing glances in the rearview mirror, noting the way William's shoulders shivered faintly, as if the cold had seeped into his bones. They reached the depot just past midnight, the lot empty save for a few parked buses dusted with snow. Michael cut the engine, the silence sudden and heavy, then turned to William. "All right, buddy, let's get you inside somewhere warm." He offered his hand and William took it, his fingers still chilled and trembling. They stepped out into the night, the snow having eased but the air now sharp with frost, stinging their cheeks like tiny needles. Michael pulled his jacket tighter around himself, wishing he'd thought to wrap William in something warmer. "Almost there," he said, squeezing the boy's hand gently as they crossed the street toward his apartment building. It was a plain brick structure, one of many built decades ago when the city was younger and full of promise. Nothing fancy, but Michael and Kyrie had made their corner of it a home. Clean, cozy, a refuge from the world's chaos. The street was quiet, the snow muffling their footsteps as they hurried toward the entrance. Inside, the lobby smelled faintly of old carpet and radiator heat. Michael led William to the elevator, its doors creaking as they slid open. The boy's eyes lit up, darting to the panel of glowing buttons. He reached out, tracing one with a hesitant finger, as if it were a small wonder. "We didn't have an elevator at home," William said suddenly, his voice clearer now. "We lived on the second floor. Well, before." He shrugged, his gaze dropping. "We moved a lot. I don't know where now." Michael's heart gave a quiet ache. "Sounds like you've had quite a journey," he said, keeping his tone light as the elevator groaned upward to the 6th floor. William nodded faintly, pressing another button just to watch it glow. The doors opened, and they stepped into the hallway, the air warmer and scented with the faint trace of Kyrie's lavender candles. Michael fished for his keys, but before he could fit them into the lock, the apartment door swung wide. Kyrie stood there, her petite frame wrapped in a soft cardigan, her blonde hair swept into a loose bun. Her smile was warm, but her eyes, hazel and searching, held a flicker of worry as they landed on Michael, then softened at the sight of William. "You made it," she said, her voice bright despite the late hour. "Didn't waste any time, did you?" She crouched slightly to meet William's gaze, her expression all kindness. "Hi, William. I'm Kyrie. Come on in, sweetheart, don't be shy. I've got dinner waiting and it's nice and warm inside." William hesitated, his boots scuffing the doormat, but Kyrie's gentle tone seemed to coax him forward. Michael helped him shrug off the oversized coat, its seams frayed and fabric thin, clearly scavenged from someone older. The boy's clothes beneath were no better, pants patched at the knees, a sweater too short at the wrists, boots so worn the soles flapped slightly. Michael exchanged a glance with Kyrie, her lips pressing into a tight line before she turned back to William with a smile. "Let's get those boots off," Michael said, kneeling to help. "Don't want to track snow all over Kyrie's clean floors." William nodded, standing still as Michael set the boots by the door, their laces knotted and stiff with damp. Kyrie led the way to the kitchen, where the table was set with a plate of steaming meatballs, creamy mashed potatoes, and a mug of tea curling wisps of lemon-scented steam. "I made this just for you," she said, pulling out a chair for William. Hot tea to warm your hands and, well, Michael swears my meatballs are the best in the city. Right, love? Better than any restaurant, Michael said with a grin, leaning against the counter. You're in for a treat, William. The boy slid into the chair, his backpack still clutched close until Kyrie gently took it and set it by his side. He stared at the food, wary, as if waiting for permission. Michael caught his eye and nodded encouragingly. Go on, dig in, it's all yours. William picked up the fork, his movements cautious at first, then hungrier as the warmth and flavour hit him. Kyrie sat across from him, sipping her own tea, her gaze soft but searching. Kyrie leaned forward, her hands cradling her own mug of tea, her eyes gentle but searching as she watched William eat. Were you very cold out there at the stop? She asked, her voice soft, like she was afraid to press too hard. William chewed slowly, a meatball speared on his fork. A little, he said, his tone matter-of-fact, though his fingers still curled tightly around the mug for warmth. Kyrie's gaze flicked to Michael, worry creasing her brow. He gave a slight shake of his head. Not now, we'll talk later. And she nodded, understanding. Hoping to lighten the moment, she smiled at William. So, what do you think of the meatballs? Good enough for a second helping? William's face brightened, his nod solemn, like he was delivering a verdict. They're really good, he said. Mommy made meatballs too, but hers weren't this fluffy. His voice dipped, a flicker of memory crossing his face before he took another bite. Michael leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, trying to keep his tone casual. Your mommy was a good cook then? He asked, treading carefully like stepping onto thin ice. Yeah, William said, his fork pausing mid-air. She made lots of stuff. Spaghetti, soup, but she got tired a lot. She'd cough, and sometimes she'd have to lie down. His voice grew quieter. Kevin said she was just pretending, though. He said she wasn't that sick. Michael's hands clenched into fists beneath the table, his knuckles whitening. What kind of man calls a sick woman a liar? What kind of man leaves a child in the snow? His jaw tightened, but he kept his face steady, not wanting William to see the anger simmering inside him. Before he could say anything, William yawned wide and unguarded, then clapped a hand over his mouth, his cheeks flushing. Sorry, he mumbled, embarrassed, his eyes darting between them. Kyrie's laugh was warm like a blanket settling over the room. Oh, sweetheart, it's fine. You're tuckered out, that's all. Finish up your dinner and we'll get you settled for bed. I've got the guest room all ready, it's nice and cozy. William managed a few more bites before pushing his plate back, his eyelids heavy. Kyrie stood, offering her hand. Come on, let's get you cleaned up. She led him to the bathroom, where she found a spare toothbrush still in its packaging, a relic from some long-ago dentist visit. William brushed his teeth with careful concentration, the bristles scraping softly as Kyrie ran a warm washcloth over his face, wiping away the last traces of the cold night. In the guest room, the sofa bed was neatly made, its sheets crisp and tucked, a quilt folded at the foot. A small lamp cast a golden glow, softening the edges of the unfamiliar space. Kyrie fluffed the pillow, her movements gentle but deliberate. Will you be all right here, William? She asked, smoothing the blanket. It's comfy, I promise. William nodded, perching on the edge of the bed, his backpack still clutched close until he finally set it down. Yeah, he said, his voice small but sure. Thank you. Then, in a sudden rush, he leaned forward and wrapped his arms around Kyrie, his hug quick but fierce. You're kind, he whispered, like the good people in the stories Mommy used to read me. Kyrie's breath caught, a lump rising in her throat. She hugged him back, her hand resting lightly on his head, fingers brushing his dark hair. You're welcome, sweetheart, she managed, her voice thick. Sleep tight, okay? Everything's going to be all right. She lingered a moment, watching as William climbed under the covers, his eyes fluttering shut almost as soon as his head hit the pillow. Quietly, she switched off the lamp and slipped out, leaving the door cracked just enough to let a sliver of light spill in. Michael was in the kitchen, sitting at the table, his hands. Kyrie sank into the chair beside him, her own tea untouched. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, as if afraid to disturb the fragile calm. Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know," he admitted, his honesty raw. "Morning comes, we'll have to call the police, I suppose. Get them looking for his mother, or this Kevin guy." He shook his head, frustration etching lines into his face. "But I hate the thought of handing him over to the system, Kyrie. You know how it is? Foster homes, shelters. After what he's been through, it doesn't feel right." Kyrie stared at her hands, her fingers tracing the edge of the table. "You know what's strange?" she said after a moment, her voice thoughtful. "He looks a little like you." Michael's eyebrows shot up, surprise breaking through his worry. "Me? What makes you say that?" She shrugged, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I don't know. Something in his face, the shape of his eyes maybe, or the way his chin curves. Even his eyebrows, that little arch." She paused, then shook her head. "Probably just my imagination." Michael frowned, her words stirring that nagging sense of familiarity he'd felt earlier. The boy's profile in the bus's mirror, the way he tilted his head. It had struck him too, though he'd brushed it off as fatigue. "Yeah," he said, forcing a chuckle. "Just a coincidence, I'm sure." But the unease lingered, a quiet ripple in his thoughts. They sat there a while longer, the kitchen clock ticking softly, their voices low as they turned over options, calling social services, checking hospitals for William's mother, tracking down Kevin. Neither wanted to say it aloud, but the thought hung between them. What if no one came for him? Finally they rose, the weight of the night settling into their bones, and headed to bed. In their room, Michael lay awake, staring at the ceiling's familiar cracks, his mind a tangle of questions. The note, the mother's illness, Kevin's cruelty, and that fleeting, impossible sense that William's face held a piece of something he should know. Sleep eluded him, the darkness offering no answers, only the faint sound of Kyrie's steady breathing beside him. The morning dawned grey and heavy, a dull light filtering through the half-drawn curtains, casting soft shadows across the apartment. Kyrie stirred before her usual hour, her internal clock nudged awake by the weight of the previous night. Beside her, Michael slept deeply, his chest rising and falling with the steady rhythm of exhaustion. He'd finally drifted off around 2 a.m., his brow still furrowed even in sleep. Careful not to disturb him, Kyrie eased out from under the blanket, her bare feet silent on the cool hardwood as she slipped from the bedroom. Her first instinct was to check on William. She padded to the guest room, easing the door open just enough to peek inside. The boy was curled into a tight ball on the sofa bed, his small frame dwarfed by the quilt, his arms wrapped around that worn dinosaur backpack like it was a lifeline. His face, softened by sleep, looked even younger, more vulnerable. Kyrie's heart twisted, a familiar ache blooming in her chest. For 7 years, she and Michael had carried the dream of a child, through hope, through heartbreak, through 3 grueling rounds of IVF, each ending in quiet devastation. The doctor's final verdict had been a cold, unyielding wall. No children, not ever. Michael had never let her bear the weight alone, never let her feel less than enough. "One day, Kyrie," he'd say, his eyes bright with that stubborn faith of his, "a miracle's gonna find us. You'll see." He'd tell her stories of couples who defied the odds, who held babies after years of no's, and she loved him fiercely for it, even as her own hope had withered to a whisper. Some nights when the world was still, she'd let herself cry, silent tears for a future they'd never touch. Now, standing in the doorway, watching William's chest rise and fall, Kyrie felt a different kind of ache. This boy, someone's child, left to the cold with nothing but a note, was a living wound. How could anyone walk away from him? How could a heart be so cruel? She closed the door softly and headed to the kitchen, needing the rhythm of routine to steady her swirling thoughts. It was barely 7 a.m. Michael's day shift meant he'd be up by 8, and William, after the ordeal of yesterday, deserved to sleep as long as he could. Kyrie moved quietly, slicing bread for toast, filling the kettle, setting it to boil with a faint hiss. The familiar motions grounded her, but her mind kept circling back to the boy, to the note Michael had shown her in the dim light of the kitchen last night. "Take care of him. His name is William. I can't do it anymore." Who had written it? A mother broken by illness, as William had hinted. A father, Kevin maybe, who'd called her suffering a lie. The questions gnawed at her, each one sharper than the last. A soft creak from the guest room snapped her attention. Kyrie hurried back, finding William awake, perched on the edge of the sofa bed. His dark hair stuck out in tufts, and his eyes, wide and uncertain, scanned the room as if piecing together where he was. "Good morning, sweetheart," Kyrie said, her voice gentle as she sat beside him. "Did you sleep all right?" William blinked, his fingers tightening around the backpack in his lap. "Good," he said after a moment, his voice small but steady, like he was testing the words. "Where's Michael?" he asked, glancing toward the door. "Still sleeping," Kyrie replied, offering a warm smile. "He'll be up soon, though. He's got to drive the bus today." William's face lit up faintly. "The big bus? Like last night?" "That's the one," Kyrie said, her smile widening. "He's been driving it for years. How about you? Want to wash up and have some breakfast? I'm making toast, and there's jam if you like it." William nodded, sliding off the bed, his borrowed pajamas, an old t-shirt of Michael's and a pair of sweatpants cinched at the waist, rumpling around him. Kyrie made a mental note to find him proper clothes, then caught herself. They hadn't decided what came next. Police, social services, answers. It wasn't their place to plan a future for him, not yet. While William shuffled to the bathroom, splashing water on his face with the earnest focus of a child, Kyrie's gaze fell on the backpack he'd left behind on the sofa. That faded blue bag, its dinosaur patch peeling at the edges, had been glued to him since the bus stop. What was inside that he clung to so fiercely? Maybe a clue, an address, a phone number, another note that could unravel the mystery of his parents. Her fingers hovered over the zipper, guilt prickling at her conscience. It wasn't right to snoop, not without his permission. But they needed to help him, didn't they? Swallowing her hesitation, she unzipped the bag. Inside was a sparse collection: a rolled-up shirt, a pair of socks with holes at the heels, a storybook with dog-eared pages titled The Dragon's Quest, and a small plastic robot, its paint chipped but its arms still posable. Tucked beneath them was a thick, worn envelope, its edges soft from handling. Kyrie's pulse quickened as she opened it, sliding out a single photograph. Her breath caught, sharp and sudden. The image stole the air from the room. A younger Michael stared back at her, 7 years younger, maybe more, his dark hair thick and untouched by grey, his smile wide and unguarded, the one that still made her heart skip. He stood with his arm around a girl, a fragile blonde with wide, luminous eyes, and a smile so gentle it seemed to glow. They leaned into each other, radiant, like the world was theirs alone. Kyrie's hands trembled as she turned the photo over. In neat, careful handwriting, a single line. "To William, this is your real father." The words burned into her, sharp and impossible. Her heart pounded, a chaotic rhythm against her ribs. The bathroom faucet shut off with a faint squeak, jolting Kyrie back to the present. Her pulse thundered as she fumbled the photograph back into its envelope, tucking it beneath the storybook and toy robot in William's backpack. She zipped it shut, her fingers clumsy with adrenaline, and hurried to the kitchen, the linoleum cool under her feet. Her mind spun, a storm of questions threatening to drown her. Michael, William's father. It couldn't be. They'd been married 7 years, their life built on trust, on shared dreams and quiet promises. If William was nearly 6, the math pointed to a time before her, before their wedding. But Michael had never breathed a word about a child, never hinted at a past that held such a secret. He wasn't the kind to hide something so monumental, or to betray her. Was he? Or had he not known himself? The possibility hung there, fragile and sharp, cutting through her certainty. William shuffled into the kitchen, wiping his damp hands on the oversized sweatpants, his hair still mussed from sleep. "There's a towel in the bathroom, sweetheart," Kyrie said, her voice automatic, her thoughts still tangled in the photograph. "Sorry," William mumbled, cheeks pink with embarrassment. He darted back to the bathroom, leaving Kyrie alone with her racing heart. She braced her hands on the counter, staring at the kettle as it began to hum. Now that she'd seen the photo, William's resemblance to Michael was undeniable, like a puzzle snapping into place. The curve of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled at the edges, the shape of his mouth, it was Michael's face, softened by youth and lightened by his mother's fair hair. Who was she? That blonde girl with the gentle smile. Michael had spoken of a first love once, years ago, in passing. A fleeting story dismissed with a shrug, no details offered. Kyrie had never pressed, content to let the past stay buried. But now it was spilling into their present, demanding answers. Michael's footsteps broke her reverie as he wandered into the kitchen, yawning, his hair sticking up in odd angles. "Morning, love," he said, pressing a warm kiss to her cheek, his stubble grazing her skin. "How's our guest doing?" "He's washing up," Kyrie replied, forcing her voice to stay even as she set out plates for breakfast. "We'll eat soon." Michael nodded, dropping into a chair and scrubbing his hands over his face, still chasing away sleep. Kyrie moved on autopilot, cracking eggs into a pan, stirring them as they sizzled. Should she tell him about the photo? Confront him now with William just down the hall? Or wait, dig deeper, find out what she could before upending their world? Her thoughts churned, but no clear path emerged. William bounded back into the kitchen, a towel slung over his shoulder like a cape. "Good morning, Michael," he chirped, his earlier shyness melting into a burst of energy. "Hey, little man," Michael said, his smile wide and easy. "Sleep okay?" "Yeah," William nodded, climbing into a chair. "Can I ride with you in the bus today? Up front where you drive?" Michael chuckled, leaning back. "Well, that's against the rules, buddy. But maybe we can figure something out. One day, not today, all right?" Kyrie seized the moment to redirect. "Michael, you've got work at 10, right? Plenty of time for breakfast first." She slid a plate of scrambled eggs in front of William, then one for Michael. "Here you go, William. Dig in." The boy obeyed, fork in hand, and they settled into an easy rhythm, the conversation dancing around safe topics. The grey clouds outside, Michael's favourite bus routes, William's love for a cartoon about space pirates. Kyrie watched them, her gaze sharpening with every shared gesture. The way they both gripped their forks, thumb over the handle, the identical wrinkle of their noses when they laughed, the slight tilt of their heads when listening. It was uncanny, undeniable, a mirror reflecting truths she wasn't ready to face. Michael finished eating and excused himself to get ready for work, leaving Kyrie and William to clear the table. As the boy stacked his plate in the sink, Kyrie crouched to his level, her voice gentle but deliberate. "William, would it be okay if I looked in your backpack, just to see if there's anything that might help us find your mom?" William hesitated, his fingers brushing the backpack's strap where it sat on the couch. Then he nodded. "Okay." He followed her to the living room, unzipping the bag himself, as if to keep some control. "There's not much," he said quietly. "Mom said only take what I need." Kyrie knelt beside him, her hands careful as she lifted out the storybook, the toy robot, the spare clothes, feigning curiosity she'd already satisfied. Her heart thudded as she reached the envelope, its weight heavier now. "What's this?" she asked, holding it up, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. William's face grew serious, his small brow furrowing. "It's a picture of my mom and my real dad." He paused, then added, "Mom said my dad's a good person. She said one day he'd take me to live with him." Kyrie's breath hitched, but she kept her expression soft. And the dad who brought you to the bus stop, he's not your real dad? William shook his head, his eyes dropping to the floor. That's Kevin. He doesn't like me. He said I'm not his son, that I'm just a burden. His voice wobbled, and he bit his lip, fighting tears. Kyrie's heart shattered. What kind of person says that to a child? She reached for him, pulling him into a gentle hug, feeling the tremble in his small shoulders. Oh, sweetheart, she whispered, stroking his hair. You're not a burden, not ever. She hesitated, then pressed on, her voice careful. Where's your mum now, William? He sniffled against her shoulder. Kevin said she's in the hospital. She's real sick. He said she won't come home again. His voice broke and a sob escaped. Then he took me to the bus stop, gave me the note, and said to wait for someone nice to take me. Kyrie held him tighter, her own eyes stinging. You're safe now, William. I promise we'll help you. We'll find your mum, or figure out what's next. Her words felt fragile, but she meant them, even as the photograph's weight lingered in her mind, a question she couldn't yet ask. Michael froze in the doorway, his work jacket half-zipped, as his eyes landed on Kyrie and William wrapped in a quiet embrace. The boy's face was buried against her shoulder, and Kyrie's hand rested gently on his back, her expression a mix of tenderness and resolve. Everything okay? Michael asked, his voice tentative, sensing the weight in the room. Kyrie looked up, her gaze steady but charged with something unspoken. We need to talk, she said, rising to her feet and taking William's small hand in hers. She crouched to his level, her voice soft but firm. William, sweetheart, could you go play in the guest room for a bit? We just need to talk for a minute. William nodded, his eyes flicking between them, sensing the shift but not questioning it. He clutched his backpack and slipped out, the door clicking shut behind him with a soft thud. The moment they were alone, Kyrie reached into the backpack on the couch, her movements deliberate. She pulled out the worn envelope and handed it to Michael without a word, her face unreadable. What's this? Michael asked, his brow furrowing as he took it, his fingers brushing the creased paper. He opened it, sliding out the photograph, and the world seemed to tilt. His breath caught, his face paling as if the air had been sucked from the room. The image burned into him, a younger version of himself, all easy smiles and dark hair, arms slung around a blonde girl with wide, luminous eyes, and a grin that used to light up his days. Where did you get this? He rasped, his voice barely holding together. It was in William's backpack, Kyrie said, her tone calm but edged with urgency. Turn it over. Michael's hands trembled as he flipped the photo. The neat handwriting on the back hit him like a blow. To William, this is your real father. He sank onto the couch, the springs creaking under his weight, his eyes locked on the words as if they might rewrite themselves if he stared long enough. Olivia, he whispered, the name slipping out like a confession, heavy with years of buried history. Your first love? Kyrie asked, her voice quiet, almost fragile, as she sat beside him, close but not touching. The one you mentioned once? Michael nodded, his throat tight, unable to peel his gaze from the photo. Olivia's face smiled back, frozen in time, her blonde hair catching the sunlight, her eyes bright with a warmth he hadn't each word measured. And that you're his real father. That's impossible, Michael said, shaking his head, the denial reflexive. Olivia and we broke up 7 years ago. Way before I met you, Kyrie. There was no... He stopped, the math creeping in unbidden. William was nearly 6. 7 years ago, he and Olivia were still together, their relationship unraveling but not yet ended. His mind raced, grasping for logic. She would have told me, he insisted, his voice cracking. If she was pregnant, she wouldn't have kept it from me. Kyrie's eyes softened, but there was a question in them, one she didn't shy from. Would you have believed her, Michael? She asked gently, her words cutting through the haze. You've told me bits and pieces, how things ended with her. The fights, the doubts. Would you have trusted her if she'd come to you with that? Michael's jaw tightened, memories flooding back. Olivia's tearful accusations, his own stubborn certainty, the way they'd torn each other apart in those final months. He'd been so sure she was exaggerating, manipulating, that he'd walked away without looking back. The possibility that she'd carried his child, alone, twisted in his gut like a blade. He looked at the photo again, at Olivia's smile, and saw William's face overlaid. Those same eyes, that same tilt of the chin. William said his mum's in the hospital, Kyrie went on, her voice pulling him back. Really sick. He said Kevin, his stepfather, told him she won't come home. Michael sat hunched on the couch, the photograph trembling in his grip, its edges worn but sharp against his calloused fingers. His eyes traced the frozen moment, himself younger and unburdened, laughing with Olivia in a way that felt like another lifetime. Memories of 7 years ago surged, unbidden, stirring a pain he'd buried deep, locked away behind years of moving forward. Losing Olivia had been a wound he'd forced himself to heal, but now it tore open raw and aching. He'd built a life with Kyrie, a good one, yet here was the past, demanding to be faced. 7 years ago, he'd been a different man, 25, scrappy, driving buses to make ends meet, his dreams big but his means small. One spring afternoon, he'd cut through the park on his lunch break and spotted her. Olivia, perched on a bench, her blonde hair catching the sunlight as she sketched furiously, her pencil dancing over the page. Something about her, the focus in her eyes, the way she bit her lip, had pulled him like gravity. He'd never been bold, but that day he'd sat beside her, blurted something dumb about her drawing, and made her laugh. That laugh had been the start of everything. They'd fallen hard, dating for nearly a year, stealing moments between his shifts and her art classes. They'd talked of marriage, of a small house with a garden where she could paint and he could tinker with old radios. But Olivia had insisted on keeping their relationship quiet, especially from her parents. They're particular, she'd said, her smile faltering. They wouldn't understand us. He'd thought she was just nervous, that love would win out. He hadn't known how wrong he was. Olivia's parents, Amy and Richard, were a wall he couldn't scale. Amy especially was a force, her sharp eyes and sharper tongue cutting through any pretense. To her, Michael was nothing, a poor kid from a nowhere family, unworthy of her daughter's future. You're after her money, Amy had spat during their one disastrous meeting, her voice cold as steel. You'll drag her down with you. Olivia's inheritance, tied to her family's real estate empire, was their obsession, and they saw Michael as a thief, not a suitor. He'd tried to fight for her. He'd pleaded with Olivia to stand up to them, to choose their love over their control. But Olivia was caught, torn between her heart and her family's threats. They'll disown me, she'd whispered one night, tears streaming down her face. They'll take everything, my home, my school, my future. She'd wanted to build a life with Michael, to hell with their wealth, but Amy's ultimatums were relentless. Marry someone from their approved list of wealthy heirs, or lose it all. The pressure wore Olivia down, her resolve fraying as the weeks passed. In the end, they'd broken under the weight. Their last fight was a blur of hurt. Michael accusing her of choosing money over him, Olivia sobbing that he didn't understand the cost of defiance. He'd walked away, heart in pieces, swearing he'd never look back. He hadn't known then that she might have been carrying his child, that her silence after their breakup could have hidden something so monumental. Now Michael stared at the photograph, Olivia's smile slicing through him. He forced himself to meet Kyrie's eyes, guilt and fear knotting his chest. Kyrie had heard of Olivia only once years ago, when he'd let slip a vague mention of a first love over late-night coffee. He'd brushed it off, unwilling to revisit the pain, and Kyrie hadn't pushed. She'd trusted him, built a life with him, loved him through every quiet moment and every storm. Yet here he was, holding proof of a past he'd never shared fully, a past that might rewrite their future. He set the photo down, unable to bear its weight any longer, and looked at Kyrie again. His eyes were raw, pleading, not for forgiveness. "I have to find her," he said, his voice rough, the words heavy with everything he couldn't yet name: guilt for Olivia, fear for William, love for the woman sitting beside him. Kyrie's face softened, her own turmoil tucked behind a quiet strength. She reached for his hand, her fingers steady against his trembling ones. "I know you do," she said, her voice low but sure. Kyrie reached into William's backpack again, her fingers brushing past the storybook and toy robot until they closed around another envelope, this one thicker, sealed with a faint crease as if it had been held tightly before being tucked away. She met Michael's eyes, her own steady despite the storm brewing inside her. "I think she wanted you to have this," she said, her voice soft but deliberate, handing it to him. Michael took the envelope, his hands unsteady, the paper trembling as he broke the seal. Inside was a single sheet, folded with care, its edges worn from travel. He unfolded it, and as his eyes scanned the lines, the colour drained from his face, his breath catching in sharp, uneven gasps. The words seemed to pull the air from the room, leaving only silence in their wake. Without a word, he passed the letter to Kyrie, his gaze dropping to the floor, as if he couldn't bear to watch her read it. Kyrie took the paper, her heart pounding, and began to read. "Michael, if you're reading this, William has found you. I'm sick, cancer. It's taken everything. Kevin's no good for him. He never loved William, never treated him like his own. William is your son. I didn't mean to keep him from you, not at first. I was scared and I was wrong. I've asked your forgiveness for everything else, but not this. William's innocent, a good boy, full of heart. I don't have long. Please take care of him. Give him the life I couldn't. Olivia." Kyrie lowered the letter, her throat tight, the words searing into her. She looked at Michael, who sat with his face buried in his hands, shoulders hunched as if the weight of the truth might crush him. His silence spoke louder than any words, grief, guilt, and a dawning realization, battling within him. Kyrie rested a hand on his shoulder, her touch gentle but firm, grounding them both. "Michael," she said quietly, "we need to go to the hospital, right now." He lifted his head, his eyes red-rimmed but meeting hers with a clarity that hadn't been there moments before. Kyrie, his anchor, the woman who'd stood by him through every joy and sorrow, looked back with unwavering resolve. In that moment, he saw her strength anew, her willingness to face this unknown with him, and gratitude swelled in his chest, mingling with the ache. "Thank you, Kyrie," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "for everything you've done for me, for us." She squeezed his shoulder, her lips curving into a small, steady smile. "I love you, Michael. I always will. And we're going to the hospital, all of us together." A small voice broke the moment, tentative but clear. "Where are we going?" They turned to see William in the doorway clutching his chipped plastic robot, its arm bent at an odd angle. His wide eyes darted between them, sensing the shift in the air. Kyrie slipped the letter behind her, shielding it from view, and knelt to his level, her voice warm. "Sweetheart, we're going to the hospital to see your mom." William's face lit up, then faltered, doubt creeping in. "Really?" he whispered. "But Kevin said we couldn't see her. He said she was taken far, far away, and I'd never—" His voice trailed off, his fingers tightening around the robot. Michael stood, his jaw set, and crossed to William in 2 strides. He knelt before him, his voice firm but kind, cutting through the boy's fear. "Kevin lied, William. Your mum's in the city hospital right now. Okay?" William nodded slowly, searching Michael's face as if testing the promise. Kyrie joined them, her hand resting lightly on William's shoulder. "William, can I ask you something?" she said gently. He nodded again, his expression serious. Did your mum ever tell you about your real dad? William bit his lip, thinking, then answered in a small but steady voice. Yeah, she said he was a good man, that he loved her a lot. But their paths weren't meant to cross. He looked down at the robot, turning it over in his hands. She said maybe one day I'd meet him. Michael's breath hitched, but he kept his gaze steady, meeting William's eyes. Kyrie glanced at him, then back at the boy, her heart aching for the truth still unfolding. I think we've got a lot to talk about, she said, her voice soft but sure. But first, let's go see your mum. Sound good? William nodded, a spark of hope flaring in his eyes, brighter than it had been since the snowy bus stop. The city hospital loomed ahead, its glass doors reflecting the overcast sky as Michael pulled into the parking lot. His hands gripped the steering wheel, knuckles pale, the engine's hum a faint echo of his racing heart. He'd barely spoken during the drive, his eyes flicking to the rearview mirror where William sat, small and quiet, clutching Kyrie's hand. Kyrie murmured to the boy, her voice a soothing thread. Something about the clouds, maybe, or the promise of hot chocolate later, her fingers gently stroking his shoulder. William's gaze stayed fixed out the window, his robot toy nestled in his lap. We're here, Michael said, cutting the engine, the words heavier than they should have been. He sat for a moment, staring at the hospital's stark facade, his mind a tangle of dread and questions. What could he say to Olivia after 7 years? How could he face her, knowing he'd missed every moment of his son's life? The weight of it pressed against his chest, stealing his breath. Kyrie reached over, her hand resting lightly on his arm. We're doing this together, she said, her voice quiet but firm, anchoring him. He nodded, swallowing hard, and they stepped out into the chilly air, William between them, his small hand slipping into Kyrie's as they crossed the lot. Inside, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and faint traces of coffee, the fluorescent lights harsh against the tiled floors. Michael's boots echoed as they navigated the corridors, following signs to the oncology ward. Olivia's room was at the end of a quiet hallway, its door slightly ajar. Michael hesitated, his fist hovering before he knocked, soft and uncertain. Come in, a frail voice called, barely carrying through the door. They stepped inside and the sight hit Michael like a physical blow. Olivia lay in a narrow hospital bed, her once vibrant blonde hair now thin and lifeless, clinging to her scalp in patches. Her cheeks were hollow, her skin almost translucent, making her eyes, those same wide, luminous eyes he'd fallen for, seem impossibly large in her gaunt face. But it was her, unmistakably Olivia, her presence still carrying a flicker of the spark that had drawn him to her all those years ago. Mom! William's voice broke the silence as he rushed to the bed, his robot tumbling to the floor. Olivia struggled to sit up, her arms trembling as she wrapped them around her son, pulling him close. William, my dear, she whispered, her voice cracking with emotion. She kissed his forehead, then looked up, her gaze locking with Michael's. Despite the ravages of illness, her eyes held that familiar fire, softened now by fatigue and something deeper, relief perhaps or resignation. You found him. Found who? William asked, pulling back slightly, his brow furrowed as he glanced between them. Olivia's lips curved into a tired smile, her breath shallow from the effort of speaking. Sweetie, she said, her voice gentle, this is your father. The words hung in the air, heavy and absolute. William turned to Michael, his small face a mix of wonder and uncertainty. Michael felt his composure crack, his throat tightening as he stepped closer, kneeling beside the bed to meet his son's eyes. I didn't know, William, he said, his voice thick with grief. I didn't know you were out there all these years. I'm so sorry. Olivia watched them, her expression unreadable, then shifted her gaze to Michael. Hello, Michael, she said softly, the years between them collapsing in those 2 words. It's been so long. Hey, Olivia, he managed, his voice barely above a whisper as he stood, moving closer to her side. Kyrie stepped back toward the window, her presence quiet but steady, giving them space while William perched on the bed's edge, clinging to his mother's hand. Michael's mind reeled, questions piling up like driftwood, but one pushed to the surface, raw and urgent. He leaned in, his voice low. "Why didn't you tell me, Olivia?" "About William." Her eyes softened, a bitter smile flickering. "It wouldn't have changed anything for us, Michael," she said, her voice faint but clear. "I was angry. Not at you. Never at you. At my parents. At the way everything fell apart. When I found out I was pregnant, we'd already broken. I thought it was too late." Michael's head bowed, memories crashing over him. Their breakup had been a storm, Olivia torn between him and her parents' iron grip, Michael too proud, too hurt to see her side. Amy and Richard had crushed their dreams, insisting Olivia marry someone worthy of their wealth. Kevin had been their choice, a spoiled heir from a family they approved, pushed into Olivia's life before the dust of their split had settled. Michael hadn't known then how quickly things had spiraled for her. Olivia's voice pulled him back. "I thought William was Kevin's at first," she admitted, her eyes distant. "We were married by then, and I was trying to make it work, for stability, for a family. But Kevin, he wasn't kind. He drank. He raged. When William started looking like you, the way he smiled, his eyes, I knew. Kevin saw it too. He accused me of cheating, said William wasn't his." Her voice wavered, but she pressed on. "He was cold to William, pushed him away, called him names. I stayed for William's sake, hoping Kevin would change, but then I got sick." Michael's jaw clenched, his hand tightening around hers, her fingers fragile as glass. "Cancer," she said simply, as if naming a storm. "The time I knew it was too late. I couldn't leave William with Kevin or let him end up in foster care." Her eyes searched his, pleading. "I had to get him to you." "We'll help you," Michael said, the words tumbling out, desperate. "We'll find the best doctors, get you treatment, whatever it takes." Olivia shook her head, a faint, sad smile breaking through. "It's too late, Michael. The doctors tried, but it's spread too far. I'm not afraid to die, not anymore. I'm only afraid for him." She glanced at William, who was tracing patterns on her blanket, then shifted her gaze to Kyrie, still by the window. "You're Michael's wife?" she asked, her voice lifting slightly. Kyrie stepped forward, her smile warm despite the ache in her chest. "Yes, I'm Kyrie." Olivia's eyes softened. "You must have a good heart," she said, her words faint but sincere. "Michael's a good man. Always was." Kyrie glanced at Michael, her love for him steady, unshaken. "He really is," she said, her voice quiet but sure, a promise woven into the words. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft beeps of monitors and the faint hum of the city beyond the window. Then, with a sudden crash, the door flew open, slamming against the wall. Kevin stood in the threshold, his broad frame filling the space, his face flushed a mottled red, eyes glassy with drink. His dishevelled hair stuck to his forehead, and his jacket hung askew, as if he'd stumbled straight from a bar. "What the hell are you all doing here?" he bellowed, his voice slurring as he scanned the room. His gaze landed on William, who shrank back against Olivia's bed, clutching her hand. "Will, where have you been? Didn't I tell you to stay home?" His tone was sharp, accusing, and William's shoulders hunched, his small body tensing. Michael stepped forward, placing himself between Kevin and the bed, his posture rigid. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low, steady, but laced with warning. Kevin's eyes narrowed, zeroing in on Michael, recognition twisting his features into a sneer. "You bastard," he spat, swaying slightly. "I've been raising your kid all these years, wiping his nose, paying for his food while you— What? Played house with someone else?" His words dripped with venom, each one a jab meant to wound. Michael's fists clenched, but he held his ground, shielding Olivia and William. "I said leave," he repeated, his voice harder now, the hospital's sterile calm amplifying his resolve. Kevin lurched forward, his hand shooting out to grab Michael's collar. Michael reacted instinctively, twisting away, but Kevin swung a clumsy fist. The scuffle was brief but fierce. Michael blocked a blow, landing one of his own to Kevin's shoulder enough to stagger him. Grabbing Kevin's arm, Michael pulled him toward the door. "Not here," he growled. "This is a hospital." They stumbled into the corridor, the door swinging shut behind them. Kyrie stayed inside, her hand on William's shoulder, her other arm around Olivia, who watched with wide, weary eyes. Kyrie closed the door firmly, muffling the sounds from outside, her focus on keeping the room a sanctuary. In the hallway, Kevin yanked against Michael's grip, his breath reeking of whiskey. "Let go of me," he snarled. "I'll call the cops. You hear me?" Michael's eyes narrowed, his voice cold and even. "I don't think you will, Kevin. You abandoned a child in a snowstorm, left him with a note like he was nothing. That's a crime. You want the police? They'll start with you." Kevin's bravado faltered, his red-rimmed eyes darting away. A nerve struck. He sagged slightly, his fight draining. "What do you want from me?" he muttered, defiance giving way to something weaker. "You think this is about tricks?" Michael said, his voice rising despite himself. "You had Olivia, a woman who deserved better, and William, a kid who just wanted a dad. You threw them away." He fought the urge to hit him, the hospital's quiet walls holding him back. "Get out. Don't come back. Not here. Not anywhere near them." Kevin glared, his jaw working, but the weight of Michael's words, or maybe the truth in them, pinned him. He stumbled back, muttering curses, and staggered down the hall, his footsteps uneven until they faded. Michael watched him go, his chest tight with anger and a strange, bitter pity. Pity for a man who'd had a chance at a family and squandered it, leaving only wreckage behind. He returned to the room, his face still taut, but softening as he met Kyrie's gaze. Olivia lay propped against her pillows, her breathing shallow, her hand stroking William's hair as he leaned against her. The doctors had been blunt earlier, their words lingering like a shadow. The cancer had spread too far, untreatable now. Weeks, they'd said. Maybe less. Olivia managed a faint smile, her fingers tracing William's cheek. "I'll always be with you, my dear," she whispered, her voice trembling but sure. "Even if you can't see me, I'll be there." William nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears, clinging to her words. Michael's throat tightened, grief for Olivia swelling alongside a fierce determination. She turned to Kyrie, her gaze steady despite her frailty. "Please," she said, her voice breaking, "take care of my son. Promise me." Kyrie sat on the bed's edge, taking Olivia's hand, her grip warm and unwavering. "I promise," she said, her voice clear, every syllable a vow. "I'll love him as my own." She held Olivia's gaze, letting the truth of it settle between them, then began to talk, her words a gentle stream, about their cozy apartment with its lavender candles, Michael's long bus routes, her job teaching piano at the music school. She spoke of their years dreaming of a child, the ache of empty arms, and how William's arrival had already changed everything. Olivia listened, her smile faint but real, occasionally murmuring a question, her energy fading with each word. Kyrie's voice slowed as Olivia's eyes fluttered, exhaustion claiming her. Michael leaned close, his voice soft. "We'll come back tomorrow, Olivia. I promise." Olivia stirred, forcing her eyes open. "William," she breathed, reaching for him. The boy scrambled closer and she pulled him into a weak embrace. "You'll live with Dad and Kyrie now," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "They're good people. They'll love you so much. Listen to them, okay?" William's lip trembled. "What about you, Mommy?" "I'll always be with you," she said, her hand cupping his face. "Even if I'm not here, I'll love you forever. Remember that." "I love you too," William choked out, hugging her tightly, his small body shaking. Kyrie and Michael stood, giving them a moment, then gently guided William away, closing the door softly behind them. In the hallway, William walked between them, his hands in theirs, gripping tightly as if anchoring himself. The elevator ride was silent until he looked up, his voice small but piercing. "Is Mom going to die?" Michael and Kyrie exchanged a glance, the question cutting deep. Lying felt wrong, crueler than the truth. Michael knelt, meeting William's eyes. "She's very sick, William," he said, his voice gentle but steady. "We don't know how much time she has, but Kyrie and I are here. We'll make sure you're okay, no matter what. I promise." William nodded, his face crumpling for a moment before he straightened, clutching their hands tighter. They stepped out of the hospital into a burst of sunlight, the clouds parting unexpectedly, the glare making William squint. Michael and Kyrie looked at each other over his head, a silent vow passing between them. The road ahead would be hard, grief, adjustments, questions. But they'd walk it together, for William, for Olivia's trust, for the family they were becoming. Olivia's passing left a quiet ache, but Michael kept her alive for William through stories, each one a thread to tether the boy to his mother's memory. On quiet evenings or walks through the park, he'd share fragments of her, how she'd pluck daisies from any patch of grass, twirling them between her fingers, how her laugh would bubble up, loud and unguarded at the smallest joke, how she'd stop to help a stranger even when her own world was crumbling. She loved carousels, Michael told William one crisp afternoon by her grave, the air sharp with autumn. Cotton candy too, sticky pink clouds of it. Once we spent a whole day at the amusement park. She rode every carousel round and round, grinning like a kid. I couldn't keep up. William listened, his eyes wide, drinking in every word. At 6, his own memories of Olivia were fading, soft-edged and fleeting. A lullaby's tune, the warmth of her hand. Photos were scarce, just a few tucked in his backpack or sent by a distant cousin, but Michael's stories were vivid, a living gallery. They stood by the simple headstone, wildflowers tucked against it, and William traced the carved letters of her name with a small finger. "Dad, did Mom love you a lot?" he asked suddenly, his voice cutting through the rustle of leaves. Michael paused, the question stirring old embers. "Yeah, son," he said, his voice steady but soft. "She loved me, and I loved her, more than I knew how to say back then. But sometimes life, it pulls people apart, even when they don't want it to." William tilted his head, thinking, "But then it brought you back together, because of me." Michael's throat tightened, and he knelt, pulling William into a hug, the boy's warmth grounding him. "Exactly," he said, his voice thick. "You're the best thing fate ever gave me, kid. You brought us all together." They lingered there, the wind carrying the scent of earth and memory, then turned to leave, William's hand slipping into Michael's. As they neared the cemetery gate, William tugged at Kyrie's sleeve, his face serious. "Kyrie," he said, hesitating, "can I call you Mom?" Kyrie froze, her breath catching. Tears sprang to her eyes as she crouched to his level, her hands gentle on his shoulders. "Oh, sweetheart," she said, her voice trembling with joy. "Of course you can." "I'd love to be your mom." She pulled him close, his small arms wrapping around her, and Michael watched, his heart swelling with a quiet, fierce gratitude. Over the next year, their home transformed, filled with new rhythms. William's laughter echoing down the hall, Kyrie's piano lessons spilling soft melodies into the evenings, the clatter of dishes as they cooked together. Michael marvelled at the bond between Kyrie and William, their easy chatter over homework, or the way they'd conspire to sneak extra cookies. Seeing them together, William calling her Mom with a grin, Kyrie's eyes lighting up, felt like a fullness he'd never known. Their apartment, once tidy and quiet, now hummed with life, toys scattered across the rug, William's drawings taped to the fridge. Tomorrow, Michael's mother was coming for dinner, her voice already bubbling over the phone about her new role as a grandmother, eager to spoil William with her famous apple pie. After dinner one night, William retreated to his room to tackle math homework, leaving Michael and Kyrie in the kitchen, mugs of tea steaming between them. Outside, yellow leaves drifted past the window, the sunset painting the sky in gold and amber. "You know what I think about sometimes?" Kyrie said, her gaze on the falling leaves. "What if you and Olivia had never parted ways?" Michael's hand stilled on his mug, the question stirring a familiar ache. He looked at her, her face soft in the fading light, and sighed. "We wouldn't have met," he said quietly, the truth of it settling between them. He reached for her hand, his fingers lacing through hers. "Kyrie, I don't regret this. Us. I regret the pain, Olivia's pain, missing William's first years. But you? You're the best thing in my life. You were there when I was lost, when I didn't know how to carry this. You made us a family." Kyrie's eyes glistened, her smile trembling. She squeezed his hand, her heart full. William's voice calling her mom had healed a wound she'd carried for years, the barren years of tests and tears. He wasn't her blood, but he was her son, their bond woven through countless small moments. Bedtime stories, scraped knees, shared secrets. She loved him fiercely, as if he'd always been theirs. One evening, as they sat folding laundry, William looked up from his pile of socks. "Mom," he said, his tone thoughtful, "do you think I'll ever have a little brother or sister?" Kyrie's heart clenched, joy and old pain colliding. The doctor's verdict still echoed. Children of her own were a near impossible dream, but William's earnest face softened the sting. She smiled, reaching for his hand. "I don't know, sweetie," she said, her voice steady. "The doctors say it's not likely, but you know, miracles happen. You're proof of that, the best miracle we could have asked for. Maybe another one's out there waiting." William nodded, his expression grave, like he was turning it over in his mind. "I pray for it every night," he said, his voice small but certain. Kyrie's eyes shimmered, tears threatening to spill. "You do?" She pulled him into a hug, his warmth chasing away the ache. "Thank you, William. That means the world." They sat there, her hand in his, the wind whistling outside, rustling the fallen leaves. The kitchen clock ticked softly, marking the moment, a snapshot of their life now, imperfect but whole. Ahead stretched a future of joys and challenges, laughter and tears, but they faced it together, no longer